Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided.
This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy is sponsored by Thomson Reuters, providing legal professionals with the intelligence, technology, and human expertise they need to find trusted answers. Products include Westlaw, Practical Law, and Firm Central legal practice management software for small law firms. Thomson Reuters, the answer company. Online at thomsonreuters.com. Access to Democracy is made possible in part by a donation from Firefly Credit Union. Firefly is the new name of U.S. Federal Credit Union, which has proudly served the financial needs of the Greater Twin Cities community since 1925. At Firefly, we guide our members forward and give them the power to chase dreams by delivering the financial solutions they need to get ahead. From checking accounts to mortgages, we'll light the way. We are Firefly Credit Union, and this is Life Illuminated. And Dr. Charles Crutchfield of award-winning Crutchfield Dermatology in Eagan, acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. A Minnesota native who trained at the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Crutchfield personally treats all patients and states that experience counts and quality matters. Crutchfield Dermatology. Look good, feel great, with beautiful skin.
Welcome. Access to Democracy welcomes you back. Alan Miller with you, and we welcome back Dakota County Attorney James Backstrom, who has been a regular over the years, probably the last 10 or 12 years, but we haven't had you here in a couple of years. So
thanks for having me back.
The county attorney started 40 years ago as a lawyer in that office. He has served as Dakota County Attorney, the boss, for 30 years. He's running again in 2018. And I thought you had been the longest serving county attorney in the state. But I find out you're number two.
I know, I'm number two. The McLeod County Attorney, Mike Young, who is a good friend of mine, married to Ember Reichgott Young. You might know her name from the legislature for years past.
Certainly do.
Anyways, Mike is a great county attorney in McLeod County. He became the county attorney 2 or 3 months before I was sworn in by our county board in Dakota County, and he's younger than me, so I don't think I'm ever going to catch Mike in terms of years of service, but he does a great job and he's a good friend.
What are the biggest changes that you've seen in terms of Dakota County and the practice of basically criminal law, although your office does a lot of other things as well?
Yeah, we do a lot of work in addition to criminal prosecution, but that's something that is one of the main focuses of our office. Obviously, is to deal with the crimes that occur and try to hold the offenders accountable for committing those crimes. And the county attorney is the gatekeeper to the criminal justice system. We're the ones that make the decision whether someone should be charged with a crime, what level of charges to bring, and that starts the process. And we have a great deal of input and control over the cases as they move through the process as well. But we've had a busy year. We've had increases in our felony prosecutions, which is what the county attorney primarily prosecutes in the metro area, are the felony crimes. In the outlying parts of Dakota County, the township areas, we prosecute all levels of crime, and for juveniles, we handle all levels of juvenile prosecutions in the county attorney's office. But in the major part of Dakota County, we handle the felonies. What's changed in the last 40 years? Well, I can tell you it's the growth of Dakota County, that went from an office that I started in with 8 lawyers. We now have 41 assistant county attorneys that work in my office. We're the 25th largest law firm in the state of Minnesota, clearly the largest law firm in Dakota County. And it's a big operation, and we have a lot of work to do, not just the criminal prosecutions, but the legal advice to our county officials, the protection of children and vulnerable adults through the civil process, the child protection and adult protection process.
Which is certainly a big and burgeoning field.
Oh, it's a very important field. When we think of individuals who've been neglected or abused or harmed in any way, at the same time there might be a criminal prosecution going on. We hope for the person, if we're able to identify who harmed them, we're also going to intervene to protect that child or that vulnerable adult.
And drug court, you've been very instrumental in the setting up of a drug court.
Well, listen, and that's another thing that's changed dramatically in Dakota County in the years that since I've been the county attorney is sadly the increase in the number of drug prosecutions. It dominates the caseloads in my office today. We had this last year we had 2,135 total felonies charged. 744 of those were drug offenses. And that's just sale, possession, or manufacture of illegal drugs. If you added in all the other crimes associated with illegal drug use in our county, the robberies, the thefts, the burglaries, the domestic violence, the sexual assaults, some cases even murders, it would add up to over 45% of all the crime.
They find their way back to drugs.
Yeah, overall, almost 45 to percent or more of the crime in our county is related to illegal drug use, and we're not alone on this. This dominates the caseloads of county attorneys across Minnesota, as well as across our nation. So it's a real problem. So what are we doing? Drug courts is one of the innovative things we've developed, and I'm proud to have helped start the adult drug court here in Dakota County, where we every week, and I personally staff this program, 85-90% of the time, because I believe in it, and it's where we bring offenders into a very intensive treatment-focused approach. These are non-violent, chemically addicted offenders. And the one thing that's, even in my own mind that's changed since I became the county attorney, I now understand that addiction is a disease. And we need to understand that in our criminal justice process.
Well, especially something like these opioids.
Yes.
The doctor prescribes it, a person takes it, and then finds himself hooked on it for no other expression.
Yeah.
And it drives them to do things that ordinarily they wouldn't necessarily do.
Oh, absolutely. And it's so pervasive, and it's so these chemicals, these drugs, the meth, which is the number one drug crime in our county by a long shot, which is getting out of control again in our community. But the rapid rise of heroin and prescription drug abuse in our community, if you add those two together, that's the second most abused, these opioid substances, which lead to the heroin abuse. And that's rapidly rising, and it's very deadly in terms of the overdoses that you see from those substances. So anyways, drug court is an innovative approach which is much more frequent court appearances, much more frequent contacts with probation agents, much more relationship building with the judges involved, and with myself and my office and their own attorneys, and we get to know these individuals on a personal level. And I really believe it's the relationships that we are able to establish that help put some hope back into the lives of these folks and get them into situations where we can get them back to be healthy, away from the chemicals that have controlled their lives, and to become law-abiding, productive citizens again.
Controlled their lives, and in many instances destroyed their lives.
Absolutely. And I've had a number of individuals, and we've got two really great judges right now, Judge Karen Ospog and Judge Erica McDonald, who sit on our adult drug court. They rotate every other week. They do a terrific job in terms of working with these individuals. But anyways, we've had individuals that have graduated from our program that have told me flat out, I'd be dead today if you hadn't believed in me and given me the opportunities to be in this program. So it makes you feel pretty good.
The first judge that we had on this show, and we're going 18 years, was Judge Ospog. As a matter of fact, we tried to make arrangements to get her back a little earlier this year, and we couldn't coordinate the dates, but we have to continue.
Well, she's a wonderful judge. Started her career in the Dakota County Attorney's Office, so she worked with me for a number of years, but she's been on the bench for many, many years now. I think over 25, and she does a terrific job.
Now, there have been some changes in the approach to officer-involved use of deadly force, which we have read about so much lately. why don't we talk a little bit about that? And in terms of crime statistics, are they going up or where are we sitting?
Well, the overall, let's talk about the overall crime statistics. First, the overall, in our county, which is, keep in mind, Dakota County is a relatively safe community. We have a relatively low crime rate on a per, population basis. Our crime rate is relatively low. This is a very safe community, but unfortunately, we do have crime. And in the last 3 years, it's risen fairly significantly. We had a 21% increase in from 2015 to 2016 alone, but that was driven primarily by increases in drug crimes, which went up 33% this last year. So
I finished the Eagan Police Academy, Citizens Academy, and the night that I had a ride along, we had 3 calls to the Eagan Outlet Mall. We had other calls, but in particular, now that wasn't even there 3 years ago. And they were all theft calls. One was a domestic, but that in and of itself, the new shopping centers have to lead to more crime. And
Well,
also requests, I just read in the paper today that Eagan has requested 5 more police officers. We've been pretty steady around 70, 71 for probably the last 5, 6 years. So that's mandated by not only that, by the fact that the Vikings are going to have a headquarters here, even though they come with their own security. And time marches
Eagan
on.
is a big city now, and it's grown dramatically in our county. They have a terrific police force. Chief McDonald does a great job.
Oh, he's terrific, and he's
but the
a frequent guest.
But you're right. The mall, when that outlet mall opened, it's led to a lot of theft-related crimes. Most of those are misdemeanor level offenses, which get prosecuted by the city attorney, and city attorneys do a terrific job in our county, and we're lucky to have them. But some of those cases do rise to the felony level. If it's over $1,000 that's involved, it's going to become a felony, and it'll get to my office.
Yeah, one of the calls that we had at the outlet mall was in a clothing store where the manager at closing time was distracted, and 2 other people scooped up armfuls of really jeans and shirts, but it was in excess of $1,500 worth. So
Yeah, that
that
is the
would
case that
find
would
its
come
way.
to the
Yeah.
the county attorney for a felony prosecution. And yeah, we've certainly seen rises in those types of offenses. But as I said, it's the illegal drugs that dominate our caseload and really lead to so much crime and so much tragedy and in our communities, not just to the abuser, but to their families as well, who see them hopelessly suffer from these addictions. And it's a challenge, and that's why I guess we got to look for ways. And the other thing I'm proud of in this past year, along with John Choi, the Ramsey County Attorney, and Mike Freeman, the Hennepin County Attorney, and we kind of led the effort to reform our drug laws last year. This was a prosecutor-led effort. We had a great partnership that we worked with, including public defenders and private defense attorneys, which is kind of a unique coalition.
Certainly is.
When you're talking about dealing with prosecutors. And we also had some private entities that are involved in looking for better ways for our criminal justice system to function. But the bottom line is, we reformed our drug laws in our state, rightfully so, to eliminate a number of the mandatory minimum sentences that would otherwise apply to nonviolent chemically addicted offenders, which would keep them out of drug court programs because they were mandatory sentences to prison if they committed these offenses. And now for those folks, we've eliminated many of those mandatory minimums. We have raised the sentences for the serious violent drug offenders, the gang members that are selling large quantities of drugs, the so-called kingpins of the drug distribution networks. They're going to prison for longer periods of time, as they should. But it was a unique coalition of this, and we actually, for the first time drug offense now at the lower levels, what we call fifth-degree crimes, are a gross misdemeanor. They're not even a felony. They're still prosecuted by the county attorney, but they're gross misdemeanors and not a felony. Again,
and that's working with the legislature as well.
Yes, absolutely. The legislature did a great job, and we were part of that coalition, and I'm proud of the work that we did to address that. But we have a lot of work still to do. This is still a huge problem, and we're going to continue to struggle with it in our society as well as our criminal justice system.
Back to officer-involved use of deadly force. How is that changing, and what has mandated the change?
Well, there's been obviously a number of high-profile officer-involved shootings across the Twin Cities, across our nation.
Even here in Egan, which they used to have 0.6 of one homicide a year, and we've had a couple already this year.
Well, we've had 3 officer-involved shooting deaths in Dakota County in the last year and a half. So I mean, these offenses do happen, and we need to understand. Everyone needs to understand. What the law is. I think there's a little disconnect in terms of the general public's knowledge of what the law is. Law enforcement officers have difficult jobs to do. They are put in situations where they have to make split-second decisions that are, in many cases, are life and death related decisions. They have to make, and they're trained. And we have to continue to improve and work on their training. And I know they do that here in Egan and elsewhere in our county at a great level. And that's one of the things that's changed. We've just stepped up the training.
It's really
these whole issues of officer-involved shootings are a challenge. But we also need to understand that our officers have to be given the ability and the authority to exercise and use deadly force if they feel their life is in danger or the life of others in our community is in danger.
One of the things we did in the Citizens Academy was traffic stops, where now there's an officer in a car, and he's there to give you a hard time. And my perspective was so different. As you walk up alongside that car at night, in the dark, and maybe you have a partner on the other side, but it is a strange feeling, and it is a nervous type of feeling. And I know the guy in there is just going to give me a hard time. That's what the purpose was. And it was very effective as a teaching tool to appreciate what an officer goes through, especially these days, because you just never know.
No, you never know. And the one thing that we need to ensure, and we do, and I just want the public to understand that we look at these cases very closely. Just because an officer has authority under the law to exercise deadly force, there still can be situations when they exceed that lawful authority and when they themselves have committed a crime. We had an officer in St. Paul that was obviously charged with a manslaughter-related offense, and the jury found him not guilty. But in that case, the prosecutor felt there was enough evidence to move forward with the case. And we do look at these cases very closely, and as we should, as we do with all cases that come before our office. Now, one of the changes that I've made, just in terms of Dakota County's approach to these cases, and it's a similar change that's been done in Ramsey and Hennepin counties in the last year and a half, and that is we no longer are going to convene grand juries to review these cases. For over 25 years in Dakota County, we have
been
convened
reading
grand
about
juries
that, right?
To review these cases, and I still have confidence in grand juries in our state and in our community. They're an important process. We have to take every first-degree murder charge that's filed or contemplated. That has to be taken to a grand jury under our law in our state. And we always use grand juries in cases of officer-involved shootings. And again, it was just the purpose of that was to make sure that the public knew that there was going to be an independent body that's going to look at the facts of this case and make these important decisions. But the problem with grand juries, as we found with the high-profile shooting in the Castile case in Ramsey County and in the case in Minneapolis that occurred, the year before, is that when you have a grand jury in place, it's a secret process. And you cannot disclose what evidence was presented to the grand jury. You cannot disclose what thoughts went into their decision. Obviously, that's a deliberation process, and I think there needs to be.
And there may be a trial, so that would be
potentially
evidence
a trial
in the trial.
if that came. But most of these cases resulted in what we call a no bill, means no charge filed against the officer involved. But from now on, in our county, as is true in Hennepin and in Ramsey County, the county attorney is going to make these decisions after we review all the facts very thoroughly and very closely, and that's to increase the level of transparency in the decision-making process. I'm responsible for the decisions that I make. to the public that I serve. I'm going to make those decisions known publicly and the basis that went into those decisions with significant detail about why I made the decision that I did in these types of cases, and I can share all of that with the public in a more transparent way if I don't use a grand jury. So that's the only reason why we've moved in that direction here in our community, and in other large counties across our state and across our nation have moved in that direction as well.
There has been some public pushback, particularly in Ramsey County, about that I've read about. But it's good that you explain the process. Now, it's not just you who makes the decision. You have the ultimate decision. But how would you go about it with your assistants?
Well, my assistants, when one of these cases comes into our office, first of all, it's investigated by an independent agency. It's not investigated by the agency that employs the officer that was involved in pulling the trigger of a weapon that resulted in death.
Would that be a BCA?
It's usually the BCA will typically do this. But there's a potential. BCA has agents that are out involved in investigations too, and there's a potential that they could be involved in an officer-involved shooting, and then it would likely be the sheriff's office in the jurisdiction where that occurred that would do the investigation. But it's a separate, independent agency that does the investigation. Once that is completed, then all of that information is provided to the county attorney, and the county attorney would review it. I would assign one of my top assistants, likely my chief deputy or my criminal division head, to review the case very thoroughly and go through all of the reports and the details and write a summary of the investigation to me, and then I would review that summary. I'd also review any evidence that I felt I needed to see before I make a final decision, and then I would make that information public as quickly as we can.
That's what people have to know, that it is a process, it's a procedure, and it goes through various stages before it finally reaches you to make the final determination.
Right. You know, it's interesting because, as I said, for over 25 plus years, we had used grand juries in these cases. And I went to one of the police academies that you were talking about. In fact, I went over to the Egan one. Might have been the class before you came. The chief invited me over to talk to the academy, and to discuss this issue about officer-involved shootings and how we handle the investigations. And the first question out of the audience was, why do you use grand juries? Why aren't you making these decisions? We want to know the basis for why these decisions are made. And so anyways, that's why I have changed my longstanding policy just in the past 6 months.
Now, there's an interesting case that's been making its way through the courts, and I don't think it's been finally determined yet, about DNA collections from people who are arrested. Mm-hmm. What's the story on that?
Well, there was a law passed in 2005, by our legislature, which authorized any law enforcement agency that making an arrest for certain violent crimes to collect DNA once that person has been arrested and charged with the crime, and there's been a finding of probable cause by a judge in connection with the case. Once that is made, then the legislature had authorized the collection of DNA from those individuals. There was a court case that came down by the Minnesota Court of Appeals, not our Supreme Court, but the Minnesota Court of Appeals, that ruled that process unconstitutional, saying it was in violation of the Fourth Amendment.
Unlawful taking.
Search and seizure in violation of the Fourth Amendment. And the process basically ceased for many years in our state, but the law still remained on the books. It's still on the books today. And in 2012, I believe it was, I might be wrong on that date, but the United States Supreme Court considered a virtually similar law to what we have in Minnesota in the state of Mississippi, and they ruled that that law was constitutional under the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, and the arresting agency, once the charges are filed and the probable cause finding made, has a right to collect that information for identification purposes of individuals in their facility, just like we collect fingerprints when someone is arrested. And based upon my review then, when that was brought to my attention, it wasn't until another year and a half went by until somebody brought that case to my attention, and I read it closely. I compared it to Minnesota's law, and I believe they're virtually identical. and I made the conclusion that our law was still valid. And we had a right to enforce our law, and I've advised my sheriff to begin collection of the process. And then that, as I said, this has never been reviewed by the Minnesota Supreme Court, and we have
But it was challenged.
It's been challenged, and
Right.
it's worked its way through a couple of appellate processes, and right now we have a challenge that's been filed on us with a civil lawsuit against the county sheriff, which is the appropriate way to challenge this process, saying that they claiming it's unconstitutional, the ACLU in Minnesota, and that's going to be working its way through the trial court process first, as we establish the procedures for how we do this and what we do with this information and how we get rid of it if somebody isn't convicted of the crime. You can't keep it then.
Right.
And we have that process in place, and we work with the BCA that actually collects and stores
I mean,
the data.
it is possible that a Minnesota Supreme Court decision, because of the law in this state, in a case like this could supersede the U.S. Supreme Court and say in Minnesota, yes, or in Minnesota, no.
Well, and listen, we hope this matter will work its way up to the Minnesota Supreme Court as quickly as possible. We hope that they will rule, obviously, in favor of supporting this law, but they can make a ruling. They can make a ruling based on the Minnesota Constitution, which the ACLU's claim is that has broader implications than the federal Constitution. I don't believe that it does under these circumstances, but that's for the courts to decide. And right now we have in my view, a valid law on the books, and we're enforcing it here in Dakota County.
We have a minute and a half left. What else would you like to talk about? There's so much.
There's a lot. We've had a number of high-profile cases in recent weeks. We had the terrible, tragic shooting death of Beverly Corey on July 29th of this year in Mendota Heights. That was a armed robbery, a home invasion, which was shocking to the victim of that offense. But then it led to this police chase and the man escaping into a senior citizen complex and then going out the back door and running into an adjacent building. This is early on a Saturday morning, where unfortunately and tragically Beverly Corey was at her desk working that morning and we're alleging was confronted by Lucifer Nguyen and
he has been caught.
He's been apprehended and he's been charged now with murder. And a charge is not evidence of guilt. Let's be very clear about that. It's an allegation. Individuals are presumed to be innocent until they're proven guilty in a court of law beyond a reasonable doubt, and we're going to be pursuing that case. But anyways, that's just one recent tragedy that we've had. But all in all, we work really hard in my office every year. We try to do a lot of crime prevention work with my county sheriff, Tim Leslie, and other police chiefs around our county.
A frequent guest here, by the way.
And we're working to prevent crime as well as holding accountable the people that break the law.
I want to thank you for coming in. We got to have you back sooner than 2 years.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.